Before this morning ends, you will have to explain every choice you are making. The words were calm, almost quiet, yet they cut through the low hum of maple and Maine coffee like a bell across an empty street. Officer Grant Keller stood beside the corner table with one hand holding Marcus Reed's driver's license and the other resting near the radio clipped to his uniform. Around them, spoons stopped stirring. Conversations faded. Even the milk steamer behind the counter went silent. Marcus remained seated, his posture straight, his hands visible on the polished wooden table. A sealed leather bag rested near his right foot. His untouched coffee had gone cold. Keller looked down at him with the hard confidence of a man who believed the uniform had already settled every question. "Is that a threat?" he asked. Marcus met his eyes. "No, officer. It is a warning about documentation." That answer changed something in Keller's face. Not fear. Not yet. Irritation. The kind that appears when control does not produce obedience. "You have been watching customers, writing things down, and refusing to open that bag," Keller said. "A concerned citizen called because your behavior made her uncomfortable." Marcus glanced toward the woman seated near the front window. Evelyn Hart lowered her eyes, then quickly lifted her chin as though embarrassment could be defeated by certainty. Beside the register, Hannah Brooks, the coffee shop manager, gripped a dish towel in both hands. She had already told Keller that Marcus had caused no disturbance. Keller had barely listened. He had entered the shop, looked at the white woman who made the call, looked at the black man sitting alone, and decided where the danger belonged. "Did the caller report a crime?" Marcus asked. "I asked the questions." The sentence came fast, sharp, final. But Marcus had spent more than 20 years listening to men use authority to hide weak answers. He knew the difference between procedure and performance. Keller placed the driver's license on the table, but kept 2 fingers pressed over it. "Why are you in Belhaven?" "For a meeting." "With who?" "That is not relevant to whether I committed a crime." A nervous whisper moved through the room. Keller leaned closer. People who have nothing to hide usually cooperate. Marcus looked at the officer's chest. The body camera was there, but no recording light was visible. Then he looked toward the small security camera mounted above the front door. Keller followed his gaze and stiffened. "Are you recording this encounter?" Marcus asked. "You do not get to interview me. I am asking whether your camera is active." Keller ignored the question. Outside, a county patrol car rolled slowly past the rain-darkened windows. The courthouse clock across the street showed 9:26. Marcus had a federal briefing in 4 minutes. Inside the leather bag were sealed civil rights complaints, internal reports, and a preservation order prepared for the Belhaven Police Department. 3 of those complaints named Grant Keller. Marcus had studied the officer's history the night before. He had read statements from residents who described the same pattern. Suspicion first, questions later, cameras inactive, reports written to make fear sound like guilt. He had expected to meet Keller during a formal review. He had not expected Keller to walk directly into the evidence. "Stand up," Keller ordered. Marcus rose slowly, not because the order was justified, but because dignity did not need noise to remain visible. At 6 feet 1 inch, he was taller than Keller, but he made no attempt to use his size. He simply stood, calm and still, while the officer examined him as though composure itself were suspicious. "Open the bag," Keller said. Marcus looked down at the sealed case, then back at him. No one word. The room tightened. Keller reached for his radio. At that exact moment, it crackled to life. A dispatcher's voice filled the coffee shop. "All units near Main Street, be advised. Federal Chief Marcus Reed is overdue at the courthouse. Confirm contact immediately." Keller froze. His fingers remained on the radio. Marcus said nothing. The courthouse clock struck 9:30, and for the first time that morning, the officer looked at the name on the license as though he had finally begun to read it. For a moment, Grant Keller said nothing. The dispatcher's message lingered in the coffee shop, suspended between the rain tapping against the windows and the courthouse clock fading into silence. His eyes moved from the driver's license to Marcus, then back to the license again, as though the same name might become less dangerous if he read it slowly enough. Federal Chief Marcus Reed. Hannah repeated softly from behind the counter. Evelyn Hart shifted in her chair. The certainty that had filled her face only minutes earlier began to collapse into confusion. Keller lifted his radio but did not answer the dispatcher. Pride had trapped him between 2 choices. He could admit that the man before him might be the official everyone was searching for, or he could continue pretending the message meant someone else. There could be another Marcus Reed, he said. His voice sounded weaker than the words. Marcus studied him without satisfaction. He had seen this moment before in interviews, hearings, and internal reviews. The truth would appear. Then someone would spend their last remaining authority arguing with it. You have my identification, Marcus said. You have heard the dispatch. You can verify both in less than 1 minute. Keller's fingers tightened around the radio. I have not finished my investigation. What crime are you investigating? Marcus asked. Again, Keller had no answer. He looked toward Evelyn. You said he was watching people. Evelyn sat straighter, but her voice had lost its earlier confidence. He was looking toward the door and writing down times. It seemed strange. Marcus glanced at the small notebook beside his cold coffee. He had recorded the arrival times of patrol vehicles because the federal complaints described officers gathering near Maple and Main before beginning unofficial neighborhood sweeps. His notes were lawful. His purpose was official. Yet none of that should have mattered. A person did not need a federal title to sit quietly in a coffee shop without being treated as a threat. Did he speak to you? Hannah asked Evelyn. No. Did he approach anyone? No. Did he threaten anyone? Evelyn looked down at the table. No. Each answer removed another piece of Keller's justification. The room began to understand what Marcus had understood from the beginning. There had been no suspicious act. There had only been suspicion looking for a body to inhabit. Keller turned back to Marcus. Then explained the bag. It contains protected documents. That is convenient. Marcus's expression remained controlled, but something colder entered his voice. Officer Keller, the law does not become inconvenient simply because it limits you. The sentence landed across the room. A man seated near the pastry case slowly raised his phone, not hiding that he was recording. Another customer did the same. Keller noticed and shifted his stance. Everyone needs to remain calm. No one had raised their voice. No one had moved toward him. The only disorder in the room came from the authority he had brought inside. His radio crackled again. Unit 7, confirm status. Deputy Director Rachel Monroe is en route to Maple in Maine. Federal Chief Reed was last reported at that location. This time Keller could not pretend he had misheard. Outside, a black government sedan turned onto Main Street and slowed beside his patrol car. Marcus looked through the window. Rachel Monroe had arrived earlier than expected. She stepped from the rear passenger door wearing a charcoal coat, a federal credential already visible in her hand. Beside her walked Belhaven Police Captain Thomas Avery, his expression tense beneath the gray morning sky. Keller saw them approaching and finally removed his fingers from Marcus's license. He placed it on the table as though returning it voluntarily might erase the fact that he had kept it. Marcus picked it up, but did not put it away. You should know something before they enter, he said. Keller's face tightened. What? Marcus looked toward the inactive body camera on Keller's uniform, then toward the security camera above the door. This morning was not the beginning of your review. The bell above the entrance rang. Rachel Monroe stepped inside, saw Marcus standing beside the sealed leather bag, and then looked directly at Keller. Chief Reed, she said, the preservation order is ready. We have already secured the department's records. Rachel Monroe's words changed the room more completely than any raised voice could have. Grant Keller looked at Captain Thomas Avery, waiting for the local commander to reject what he had just heard, but Avery's expression offered no rescue. Rainwater darkened the shoulders of his navy coat. He had come quickly, and he had come worried. Officer Keller, Avery said, step away from Chief Reed. Keller obeyed, but only by half a step. His eyes remained fixed on Marcus, as though the truth were a personal insult. Rachel crossed the room and placed a sealed folder on the table beside the cold coffee. The federal preservation order was delivered to Belhaven Police Headquarters at 9:28 this morning, she said. Electronic records, personnel files, dispatch logs, body camera data, and internal complaint records are now protected from alteration or deletion. Hannah covered her mouth with one hand. The customers who had been recording lowered their phones slightly, not because the moment was over, but because they finally understood its scale. Marcus reached down and lifted the leather bag from the floor. He set it on the table, but did not open it. Officer Keller asked to search this bag without identifying a crime, he said. He retained my identification, ignored a witness who said I caused no disturbance, and failed to activate his body camera. Avery looked at the device on Keller's chest. Is your camera recording? Keller glanced down. It may have malfunctioned. Marcus watched him carefully. That phrase appeared in 4 of the complaints inside the sealed case. Not similar language. The same language. When did you confirm the malfunction? Rachel asked. I did not have time. You had time to demand access to protected property, Marcus said. Keller's jaw tightened. I responded to a citizen complaint. I did what I was trained to do. Avery's face changed at the word trained. Marcus noticed. So did Rachel. Then we will examine the training, Marcus replied, along with the supervision, reporting practices, and disciplinary decisions that allowed the same pattern to continue. Evelyn Hart rose from her chair. Her hands trembled. Around the strap of her purse. I never asked him to search anything, she said. Keller turned toward her. You reported suspicious behavior. I said he made me nervous. Her voice became smaller. I did not say he committed a crime. The distinction arrived too late to undo the call, but not too late to expose what Keller had added to it. Hannah stepped from behind the counter and pointed toward the security camera above the entrance. The recording includes sound. I can provide the entire file. Rachel nodded. Please preserve the original and make no edits. Keller looked around the coffee shop. Every witness now seemed to stand on the other side of an invisible line. Minutes earlier, he had controlled the questions. Now each answer narrowed the space around him. Captain Avery removed his hat and held it at his side. Officer Keller, surrender your department radio and access card. You are being placed on administrative leave pending an independent investigation. Keller stared at him. You cannot be serious. I am. Because of one misunderstanding? Marcus finally opened the leather bag. Inside were rows of sealed files, each marked with a date and case number. He removed 3 folders and placed them side by side. Samuel Price, Patricia Green, Leonard Hayes. Keller's face changed at the names. Marcus continued. 3 residents. 3 public encounters. 3 inactive body cameras. 3 reports using the phrase suspicious conduct before any specific offense was identified. The room fell silent again. This silence was different. It did not wait for authority to speak. It waited for authority to answer. Keller looked at the folders, then at Marcus. Those cases were closed. They were hidden, Marcus said. There is a difference. Rachel placed another document beside them. It was a copy of an archived department email recovered before the preservation order was delivered. The subject line referred to complaint management. Keller read it from several feet away and lost the last of his certainty. Marcus closed the bag. You thought this morning began when you walked through that door, he said. For the people in these files, it began years ago. Outside, the courthouse clock moved to 9:37. Inside Maple and Maine, Grant Keller stood without his radio, without control of the record, and without the protection of being the only person allowed to describe what had happened. Captain Avery placed Keller's radio and access card inside a clear evidence envelope, sealed it, and wrote the time across the label. 9:38 in the morning. The act was quiet, procedural, almost ordinary. That was what made it powerful. Keller had spent years believing consequences would arrive with noise, accusation, or spectacle. Instead, they arrived through signatures, timestamps, witnesses, and records he could no longer control. You will report to internal standards at 10:30, Avery said. Until then, you are not to contact department personnel about this investigation. Keller looked at Marcus. You planned this. Marcus closed the final folder and returned it to the leather bag. I plan to review your department. I did not plan your decisions. Keller shook his head. You came into my town, watched police vehicles, took notes, and waited for someone to react. I sat in a public coffee shop, Marcus replied. Everything after that was your choice. Rachel Monroe glanced toward the courthouse across the street. The federal briefing had already been delayed, but the delay no longer mattered. What had happened inside Maple and Maine had become part of the review itself. Chief Reed, the records team has secured the main server, she said. They found gaps in the body camera archive going back 18 months. Avery's face tightened. How large are the gaps? Too consistent to call accidental. The words settled heavily over him. Keller looked toward his captain. You know how often those systems fail. Avery did not answer immediately. Marcus watched the captain's silence and recognized something familiar. Not guilt exactly. Fear of what honesty might require. Equipment can fail, Marcus said. But equipment does not repeatedly fail around the same officer, the same type of stop, and the same kind of complaint without creating a pattern. Hannah stepped closer to the table. There is something else, she said. Everyone turned toward her. Officer Keller has been in here before. Several times. He usually sits near the back wall with two other officers. Keller's expression hardened. That is not relevant. Let her finish, Marcus said. Hannah took a breath. They talk about people they stop. They joke about which neighborhoods will be busy after dark. I never paid close attention because I thought it was just police talk. Her voice dropped. But last month, I heard them mention a man named Leonard Hayes. Marcus looked toward the folder he had just closed. What did they say? That he would not file another complaint after they warned him about interfering with an investigation. The room changed again. Rachel opened her notebook. Avery stared at Keller. Did you contact Hayes after his complaint was filed? Keller looked toward the door. I do not remember. Marcus's voice remained calm. People forget conversations. Records remember dates. Rachel checked her tablet. Leonard Hayes had withdrawn his complaint 3 days after a patrol visit to his home. The official note said he no longer wished to cooperate. There was no explanation, no audio, no body camera file. Marcus felt the old anger rise, but he did not let it control his voice. Anger could identify injustice. Discipline had to prove it. Hannah, will you provide a formal statement? He asked. She looked at Keller, then at the security camera, then finally at Marcus. Yes. Evelyn Hart stood near the window, holding her purse with both hands. Shame had replaced certainty, but she had not left. I should say something too, she said. Keller turned sharply toward her. Evelyn continued before courage could disappear. When I called, I said a black man was making me uncomfortable. The dispatcher asked what he had done. I could not name anything. I called anyway. Her voice trembled. I thought being afraid made me right. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Fear can be real, he said. That does not make every conclusion true. Outside, the rain began to ease. Across Main Street, courthouse employees gathered beneath the stone entrance, watching the government sedan and the marked patrol. Car parked side by side. Rachel lifted the leather bag. Avery opened the coffee shop door. Before Marcus followed them out, he looked once more at Keller. The most dangerous thing you did this morning was not stopping me, he said. It was proving how easily you stop people when you believe their word will carry less weight than yours. Keller stood alone beside the corner table as the others crossed toward the courthouse, where the files, the footage, and the people behind the names were waiting. The courthouse doors closed behind Marcus Reed, Rachel Monroe, and Captain Thomas Avery, shutting out the last sounds of Maple and Maine. Inside, the air carried the dry scent of old paper, floor polish, and rain-soaked coats. A security officer guided them through a metal detector and toward a second-floor conference room, where 12 chairs surrounded a long oak table. 3 federal analysts were already seated with laptops open. 2 state investigators stood beside locked evidence cases. At the far end of the room, a wall screen displayed a map of Belhaven marked with colored pins. Each pin represented a complaint. Each complaint represented a person who had been told that what happened to them was too small, too uncertain, or too difficult to prove. Marcus removed his coat and placed his father's old wristwatch beside the sealed leather bag. The watch had stopped once when Marcus was a child, and his father had repaired it at the kitchen table with patient hands. He had said that broken things did not begin working because someone denied the damage. They worked when someone opened them, found the failed part, and accepted the cost of repair. Marcus had carried that lesson into every investigation of his career. Rachel connected Hannah's security recording to the wall screen. The footage began with Marcus entering the coffee shop at 9:12. He ordered coffee, chose the corner table, opened his notebook. Evelyn Hart watched him for nearly 6 minutes before making the call. At 9:21, Keller entered. He spoke to Evelyn for 11 seconds. He never interviewed Hannah before approaching Marcus. He never asked whether anyone had witnessed a crime. He never activated his body camera. Pause there, Marcus said. Rachel froze the image as Keller looked across the room and fixed his attention on Marcus. What does the dispatch record show? One analyst opened an audio file. Evelyn's call filled the conference room. Her voice sounded uncertain. She described a black man watching customers and writing things down. The dispatcher asked whether he had threatened anyone, taken anything, or attempted to enter a restricted area. Evelyn answered no each time. Then came the most important question. What makes you believe police assistance is necessary? There was a long pause before Evelyn said, "He does not seem like he belongs here." No one in the conference room spoke. Marcus looked at the map on the wall. Several complaint locations were coffee shops, gas stations, parking lots, and storefronts. Public spaces. Ordinary places. Places where black residents had been treated as suspicious before any law had been broken. Captain Avery lowered his eyes. That call should have been classified as a welfare inquiry, not suspicious conduct, he said. Rachel opened the dispatch log. It was changed less than 2 minutes later. By whom? Marcus asked. The analyst enlarged the record. The user identification belonged to Sergeant Paul Danner, Keller's immediate supervisor. Avery stared at the name. Danner was not on dispatch duty this morning. He accessed the system remotely, Rachel said. He changed the classification, added possible theft, and directed Keller to respond. Marcus felt the investigation widen. Keller had not simply made a poor decision inside the coffee shop. Someone had shaped the record before he arrived, creating language that could later justify almost anything. Rachel opened a second file. The same user identification appeared in 9 previous complaints involving Keller. In each case, vague citizen concern became suspicious conduct. Questions became resistance. Missing footage became equipment failure. Fear became evidence. Marcus looked toward Avery. Who reviews Danner's edits? Avery answered slowly. Deputy Chief Warren Cole. Another analyst turned from her laptop. Cole approved all 9. Closures. The room grew still. What had looked like one officer's bias was beginning to reveal a chain of protection. Marcus opened the leather bag and removed the preservation order. Secure Danner's and Cole's accounts immediately, he said. No access, no deletions, no internal contact. Rachel sent the instruction. Seconds later, a warning appeared on the screen. Someone inside police headquarters had just attempted to erase a folder labeled Community Contacts. The deletion failed. The preservation order had reached the server first. Marcus looked at his father's watch. The second hand moved steadily across the face. Now we know why they were afraid of the files, he said. The coffee shop was not an isolated incident. It was the method. The failed deletion attempt triggered an automatic lock across the Belhaven Police Department network. In less than 30 seconds, every protected account was frozen, every active session was logged, and every recent file action was copied to a federal evidence server. Rachel Monroe watched the confirmation messages appear one after another. The source terminal is in the deputy chief's office, she said. Captain Avery closed his eyes for a brief moment. Warren Cole is there now. Marcus Reed did not react with surprise. Patterns rarely ended with the first person exposed. They climbed upward, finding shelter in every office where someone had chosen convenience over truth. Contact state investigators already inside the building, Marcus said. Have them secure the terminal and separate everyone with access. Rachel sent the order. Across the table, one analyst opened the restored Community Contacts folder. Rows of names appeared on the screen. Some belonged to residents already listed in the civil rights complaints. Others had never filed anything formal. Beside each name were notes, coded abbreviations, vehicle descriptions, workplaces, relatives, and comments about whether the person was likely to challenge an officer. Samuel Price was marked persistent. Patricia Green was labeled disruptive. Leonard Hayes was classified as vulnerable to pressure. Marcus felt the words settle heavily in the room. These were not observations made to protect the public. They were instructions for controlling the people most likely to speak. How many names? He asked. 146, the analyst replied. Captain Avery stared at the screen. That list is not part of any authorized department program. Rachel looked at him. Someone maintained it for nearly 4 years. Another file opened. It contained templates for incident reports. Officers were encouraged to use phrases such as evasive behavior, officer safety concern, and uncooperative attitude when no clear offense could be identified. The language was familiar because it had appeared in complaint after complaint. Marcus thought about Keller inside the coffee shop. Keller had said people with nothing to hide usually cooperated. He had treated a legal question as resistance and calmness as suspicion. Now Marcus understood that the behavior had not grown in isolation. It had been reinforced, standardized, and protected. This was training, Avery said quietly. Not official training, Rachel answered. But training all the same. The conference room door opened, and a state investigator entered carrying a sealed tablet and a handwritten access log. Deputy Chief Cole had attempted the deletion from his desktop computer. Sergeant Paul Danner had been standing inside the office with him. Both men claimed they were cleaning duplicate files before the federal review began. No one at the table mistook the explanation for innocence. Marcus looked at the map on the wall again. Colored pins covered Belhaven's east side more heavily than any other area. That was where most black families lived, where Samuel ran his repair shop, where Patricia taught middle school, and where Leonard had raised 2 daughters. The complaint pattern followed geography as clearly as it followed names. Pull traffic stops, pedestrian contacts, and field interviews by neighborhood, Marcus said. Compare them by race, outcome, and whether any citation or charge followed. The analyst began the search. The first numbers appeared within minutes. Black residents made up less than 1/3 of Belhaven's population, but accounted for nearly 2/3 of recorded suspicious person contacts. More than half ended without a citation, arrest, or documented offense. Silence filled the room. Numbers did not tremble. They did not forget. They did not become less credible because someone found them uncomfortable. Avery sat down slowly. I signed monthly reports saying our enforcement patterns were balanced. Marcus turned toward him. Did you verify them? Avery looked at the table. I trusted the summaries Cole gave me. Trust without verification becomes permission, Marcus said. Rachel received a new message and passed her tablet to him. Keller had arrived at internal standards, but before surrendering his personal phone, he had sent one text to Sergeant Danner. The message contained only 6 words. They found the list. Delete everything. Marcus read it twice, then placed the tablet beside his father's watch. The second hand continued moving, patient and exact. Preserve the phone records, he said, and notify Keller that his administrative interview is now part of an obstruction inquiry. Outside the courthouse windows, the rain had stopped completely. Sunlight began to break through the gray sky, touching the wet streets below. Inside, the system that had survived through shadows was being forced into the light, one record at a time. By 10:15, the courthouse conference room had become the center of an investigation far larger than anyone in Belhaven had expected. Federal analysts moved between laptops, state investigators carried sealed devices in and out, and Captain Thomas Avery sat at the far end of the table with the expression of a man watching years of trust collapse into evidence. Marcus Reed remained standing beside the wall screen, where the restored list of community contacts still glowed under the fluorescent lights. 146 names. 146 reminders that prejudice could become policy when enough people stopped asking who benefited from the rules. Rachel Monroe entered with a new folder. Internal Standards completed the first interview with Keller, she said. Marcus looked at her. Did he acknowledge the text? He claimed panic. He said he believed the list contained private working notes that could be misunderstood. Avery gave a bitter laugh. Misunderstood by the people named on it. Rachel placed the folder on the table. He also said Sergeant Danner told him the federal review was politically motivated and that everyone involved needed to protect the department. Marcus opened the interview summary. Keller's answers followed the same pattern as his reports. Vague language. Passive phrasing. Responsibility placed everywhere except on himself. He had not targeted anyone. Concerns had been raised. Procedures had been followed. Mistakes may have occurred. Even confession had been shaped to avoid ownership. What about Danner? Marcus asked. He requested counsel and stopped the interview. Rachel turned another page. But the forensic team recovered deleted messages between Danner and Deputy Chief Cole. They discussed complaint strategy, body camera gaps, and ways to classify stops so they would survive court review. Avery stood and moved toward the window. Main Street shone beneath the clearing sky. From 2 stories above, Belhaven looked peaceful. Brick storefronts, church steeples, wet sidewalks reflecting sunlight. A town could look innocent from a distance. Systems often did. I promoted Cole, Avery said. I signed Danner's evaluations. I defended Keller when the city council asked about complaints. Marcus closed the folder. Then your responsibility begins with the truth, not with protecting your reputation. Avery turned back. What do you expect me to do? Tell the public what happened. Release the records the law allows. Invite an independent monitor. Reopen every complaint connected to these officers. And stop calling a pattern a series of misunderstandings. The captain absorbed each demand. None sounded dramatic. That was the point. Real reform rarely arrived as a single heroic act. It came through policies rewritten, supervisors replaced, hearings reopened, and people forced to explain decisions they once made in private. Rachel received a call and stepped aside. When she returned, her expression had changed. "Leonard Hayes is downstairs," she said. "He heard about the investigation and asked to speak with Chief Reed." Marcus looked toward the folder bearing Leonard's name. The man had withdrawn his complaint after an undocumented visit from officers. No one knew whether he would still be willing to testify. "Bring him in," Marcus said. Leonard entered 5 minutes later wearing a work jacket faded at the elbows. He was 62, with tired eyes and hands marked by years of carpentry. He stopped when he saw the federal team, then looked toward Avery. "I almost left," he said. "I have spent 3 years learning what happens when you talk." Marcus invited him to sit. Leonard did not. "Keller came to my house after I filed the complaint," he said. Danner was with him. "They told me they could make every permit inspection on my jobs harder. They said nothing directly. They did not have to." Avery lowered his head. Leonard continued. "I withdrew because my daughter had just started college. I could not risk losing work." His voice remained steady, but the cost of each word filled the room. Marcus slid the restored contact list across the table. Leonard found his own name and read the note beside it. "Vulnerable to pressure." For several seconds, he simply stared. Then he looked at Marcus. "They wrote down the reason they thought I would stay quiet." Marcus nodded. "And now that reason is evidence." Leonard sat slowly. The room waited. He placed both hands on the table. "Then write this down too," he said. "I am not quiet anymore." Rachel opened her recorder. Avery faced him. Marcus looked at the map, the files, and the names that had been treated like problems to manage. Outside, sunlight spread across Belhaven. Inside, one man's testimony became a door, and behind it stood dozens of others who had been waiting for someone to hold it open. Leonard Hayes spoke for 43 minutes. He described the first stop, the complaint, the visit to his home, and the months that followed when inspectors began appearing at his job sites with questions no one had asked before. Rachel Monroe recorded every word. Marcus Reed listened without interrupting. Captain Thomas Avery wrote notes by hand, though several times his pen stopped moving. When Leonard finished, the room remained quiet. "How many others were contacted after filing complaints?" Marcus asked. One analyst turned toward her laptop. "We have already identified 11 similar cases." Rachel opened a new file. 7 involved Keller. 8 involved Danner. All 11 were later withdrawn or closed for lack of cooperation. Avery looked toward Leonard. "I signed those closures." Leonard met his eyes. "Then you signed your name under our silence." The sentence landed without anger, which made it impossible to dismiss. Marcus stood and walked toward the wall screen. The map of Belhaven was now layered with new information. Complaint locations, traffic stops, camera gaps, permit inspections, supervisor edits. What had once looked like isolated decisions now formed a network. Not chaos. Design. "We are moving this review into a formal civil rights investigation," Marcus said. "The department will operate under independent evidence controls beginning today." Avery nodded slowly. "I will cooperate." "Cooperation is the minimum," Marcus replied. "Accountability requires action." Rachel began listing the immediate measures. Keller, Danner, and Deputy Chief Cole would remain on administrative leave. Their system access would stay frozen. Every case connected to altered reports would be preserved. Outside investigators would interview complainants without local officers present. A public hotline would open before the end of the day. The city attorney would be notified that no record could be destroyed, moved, or rewritten. Each instruction removed another layer of protection from the people who had depended on confusion. At 11:20, the courthouse clerk announced that reporters had gathered outside. News of the coffee shop footage had spread across Belhaven through customer videos, church groups, and local radio. More residents were already arriving with copies of old complaints. Marcus looked at Leonard. "Are you willing to speak publicly?" Leonard considered the question. "Not about everything," he said. "But I will say I was afraid, and I will say why." Marcus nodded. Courage did not require surrendering every private wound. It required choosing which truth could no longer remain hidden. Down the hall, Keller sat in a secured interview room with his attorney. He had been informed that the text message to Danner had been preserved. He had also been shown a still image from the coffee shop security footage. Captured at the exact moment, he looked at Marcus and chose not to question the caller first. According to the investigator's notes, Keller stared at the image for a long time before saying, "I thought I knew what I was looking at." When Rachel read the statement aloud, Marcus felt no triumph. That sentence was the center of everything. Keller had not lacked information. He had trusted his assumption more than the truth available in front of him. Avery stood beside the window. "What happens to him now?" he asked. "The evidence decides," Marcus said. "Not anger, not embarrassment. Evidence." At noon, the courthouse doors opened. Nearly 200 people filled the steps and sidewalk below. Marcus stepped outside with Rachel, Avery, and Leonard. Cameras lifted. Voices fell. Marcus did not describe himself as a victim. He did not describe Keller as a monster. He spoke about records, patterns, witnesses, and the responsibility of institutions to correct what they had protected. Then Leonard approached the microphones. His hands trembled, but his voice did not. "They wrote that I was vulnerable to pressure," he said. "They were right once. They are wrong today." Behind him, the courthouse clock struck 12. Across the street, Maple and Main stood in clear afternoon light. The corner table was visible through the window. Empty now, but the truth that had been sitting there all morning had finally entered the public record. By late afternoon, the crowd outside the courthouse had thinned, but the work inside had only begun. New complaints arrived through the public hotline every few minutes. Some callers spoke with anger. Others whispered as though an officer might still be listening. Rachel Monroe assigned each statement a number, a time, and an investigator. Marcus Reed insisted that no account be labeled minor before it was heard. Experience had taught him that systems rarely collapsed because of one dramatic act. They collapsed because too many ordinary injustices had been filed separately and forgotten. At 3:40, Captain Thomas Avery returned from police headquarters carrying a sealed personnel archive. His face looked older than it had that morning. "Cole kept private copies of disciplinary reviews," he said. "Keller had 5 sustained violations that never reached the city oversight board. Danner approved corrective counseling instead of formal discipline." Leonard Hayes sat near the window, listening. He had remained after the press conference because 3 other residents had recognized him and asked whether speaking had truly helped. Leonard had told them the truth. It did not erase the fear. It gave the fear a direction. Marcus opened the archive. The first report concerned an unlawful detention outside a grocery store. The second described a search conducted without clear consent. The third involved a complaint that Keller had retained identification after the reason for the stop had ended. The pattern was so familiar that Marcus could almost hear the coffee shop again. The quiet room. The cold cup. The officer pressing 2 fingers over a license that did not belong to him. "He was warned," Avery said. "More than once." Marcus looked at him. A warning without consequences often heard as permission. Avery did not defend himself. "I know." Across town, Keller completed a second interview. This time he stopped describing the morning as a misunderstanding. He admitted that he had assumed Marcus was suspicious before speaking to Hannah. He admitted noticing the inactive body camera and choosing not to correct it. He admitted sending the message because he knew the restored list would expose earlier stops. The admissions did not make him brave. They made the record complete. Rachel placed the interview summary beside the archive. "The city has terminated Danner and Cole's system access permanently," she said. "Avery has placed Keller on unpaid suspension pending the full disciplinary hearing. State prosecutors are reviewing the attempted deletion and witness intimidation evidence." Marcus nodded. Justice was not one punishment announced before sunset. It was the patient rebuilding of every process that had been bent to protect power. At 5:10, the federal team issued its first public order. Belhaven would submit to independent monitoring. All suspicious person stops from the previous 4 years would be reviewed. Body camera failures would require outside technical verification. Complaints could no longer be closed solely because a resident stopped responding after contact from an officer. The city would fund legal assistance for people whose cases might have been affected by altered reports. When the order was read aloud, Leonard closed his eyes. "My daughter used to ask why I gave up," he said. "Tonight, I can tell her I came back." Marcus removed his father's watch and turned it over in his palm. The scratched metal reflected the courthouse lights. His father had once told him that repair began when someone finally stopped calling damage normal. Outside, the sky over Belhaven had cleared completely. Marcus crossed Main Street alone and returned to Maple and Main. Hannah had kept the corner table empty. A fresh cup of coffee waited beside his notebook. Evelyn Hart stood near the counter, uncertain whether she had the right to approach. "I am sorry," she said. I turned discomfort into an accusation. Marcus looked at her carefully. "Then do not remember me because of my title," he said. "Remember that I deserved fairness before you knew it." She lowered her eyes and nodded. Through the window, Keller's patrol car was gone. The courthouse clock moved toward 6. Marcus sat where the morning had begun and listened to the steady ticking on his wrist. Keller had trusted a badge to make his assumptions sound like law. But the truth had been watching from the corner table, recording every choice, waiting for the moment authority could no longer look away.